Let's Not Meet is one of my favourite subreddits, but I've noticed that most of the stories written here happened in the USA. Here is a little taste of horrors that we lived through south of the border, in Mexico. This happened to a friend of my mother's relatives, a family of 4, Arturo, the dad, Maria the mum, Eduardo the son, and Anna, the daughter, who happened to be extremely beautiful. They live in Mexico City, but as is common for upper middle to upper class families, they went to spend a long weekend in Acapulco, a vacation spot that, frankly, has seen better days, as it was overshadowed by Cancun in the 80s. Acapulco had recently been the focus of gang-related warfare, since homegrown gangs refused to cede territory to the powerful Sinaloa cartel. This inconvenience, however, did not completely stop the flow of tourists to this once gorgeous, now decadent port, and did not stop Arturo and his family from going, a decision they would later regret enormously. The family was dining in a restaurant next to the sea, enjoying the delicious seafood, when the waiter, clearly nervous, came to the table with a bottle of expensive champagne and a note. "This is from the gentleman over there," he said, pointing at a table where 4 men sat that you could just tell at first glance were narcos, wearing gold chains, rings and the like, and drinking Johnny Walker Blue Label. Arturo unfolded the note and read, "This is for you to have a toast with your daughter, as this is the last night you will ever see her." Arturo got up, left 1,000 pesos on the table for the meal, and they went straight back to the hotel where, in terror, they made their bags and prepared to leave immediately. Along the way to Mexico City, there are several desolate stretches where all you can see is desert, and perhaps some misshapen little houses and a gas station. Arturo stopped the car at one of those gas stations to fill up. As he was filling up, 2 cars suddenly pulled into the gas station, one parking in front and one behind the family's car. They'd been followed. Several men exited the vehicles and pointed their AR-15s at the family. They came to honor their word. They came for Anna. According to Arturo, there are few worse feelings than being powerless as you watch your daughter, screaming and kicking, being dragged into a car, which then speeds away over the horizon, never to be seen again. Unfortunately, most of these incidents go unreported, since the fear of retaliation is too great. This happened when I was 18 years old, during the summer before I moved to the US for college. I was living in Mexico City at the time. I spent that summer hanging out with my friends, partying, drinking and the like. It was very fun. After one of those nights of heavy drinking, I woke up in my buddy's house at around noon and headed straight out. I had a pounding headache, and the sun's hard rays blurred my vision, dazing me as I got off the bus and walked the few blocks between the bus stop and my house. No one was home except our maid, Carmen. Maids are a lot more common and cheaper for middle-class families in Mexico. I entered, and I laid down on the first couch I saw. I started drifting off into Morpheus's embrace, when I was woken up by the phone ringing. Carmen answered, and about a minute later, came to give me the phone. I could see in her eyes that something was not right. Her hand was shaking as she handed me the handset. She said, in a very tiny voice, "I think someone has La Señora." "What?" I said, incredulous as I put the phone to my ear. On the line was a woman, screaming in agony. I couldn't understand what she was saying. She was mostly screaming and crying and something about a finger, and all I could think was, fuck, they've got my mum. The woman's scream stopped, and suddenly a man was on the line, who said in a threateningly calm voice, "We've got your mum. We've already cut off one of her fingers." At this point, my vision became all black with rage and anguish, and I started to lose my grip on reality. Do you guys have any idea how it feels to know that your mother, the woman who's been there for you all your life, is being tortured in some dark room somewhere in the largest city in the world? I hope you never find out. The man demanded money, and I didn't have any. I frantically searched my parents' bedroom for a hidden stash of cash, anything. The guy kept saying that he would kill her if I didn't have any, and I kept pleading to the man to wait until my father gets home. He has money. At that point, I was in tears, living some of the worst moments of my life, when all of a sudden, I heard the door of the house open, and with unfathomable relief, I heard the sweet, angelic voice of my mother as she yelled at my dad to grab something from the car. I ran downstairs and hugged her so hard. I yelled into the handset, "Chinga tu madre puto," and I hung up. Turns out, I was the victim of a scam that had just become common in Mexico, where people would call random phones and pretend to have kidnapped a family member. They ask for you to meet them somewhere immediately and bring cash for a ransom, saying they will kill or keep torturing the victim until you give them what they want. Obviously, not everyone falls for this, but a lot of people like myself get so freaked out and confused that they don't think it through and just end up giving away their cash. My mother grew up in Mexico. She was born in 1963 and only made it to her first year of high school before she could no longer afford to attend. Unlike in the US, you have to pay for your tuition the entire time, not just for college. She decided to start working in order to help support her aging father. Now, this was a very rural, little town in Mexico, and my mother didn't have any indoor plumbing or any sort of heating or air, so she certainly didn't have a car. As a result, she ended up having to walk everywhere, or, if she needed to go to work, take a bus. Oftentimes, when she'd get out late, she'd end up stuck sharing the bus with the nighttime weirdos and pervs. Now, my mother has always worried about me, being her only daughter. She doesn't like me ever being alone or wearing any sort of revealing clothing, and I always assumed that it was just due to her being an overprotective parent. It wasn't until she told me this story that I fully understood why. There was a certain man who would ride the late-night bus who enjoyed bothering young women coming home from work. He'd make lewd comments, or even try and grope or harass them. My mother tells me that at this time, there was very little recourse for a harassed woman in an old-fashioned town like this. Men were always right, and if a woman was molested, it was obviously her fault for wearing slutty clothes or hanging out with unmarried men. Stupid, but what could you do? Even if the police weren't corrupt, as they often were, it was a woman's word against a man, and the man would win. So, this guy would mess around with the young woman who happened to be riding alone, and usually, they just had to take it. Until one day, my mother watched this creeper go up to a young woman and straight up grab her breast, a big ugly smirk on his face. But, unlike the girls before, she didn't just sit there and take it. She stood up and slapped him in the face, screaming at him not to touch her again, and calling him names, telling him the reason he had to bother women was because he wasn't man enough to find a real girlfriend. Everyone on the bus was in awe, and some people even laughed at him. Getting hit and talked down to by a woman was shameful for a man, and my mother could see his face turning red and purple with resentment and fury that she'd resisted him. About 2 stops later, the girl got off the bus and began walking down a dark dirt road. This was very late at night, and of course, there were no streetlights at this time. I can remember my mother's breath hitching in her throat as she recalled this part of the story, as if she wanted to cry. She told me that she looked at the man's face at that moment and saw the coldest, most hateful fury reflected in his eyes as he watched her get off, and then he got off the bus as well. There was nothing my mother could do as she watched him follow her down the road at a distance, growing smaller and smaller as they both got further away. She wanted to do something, but she was just a teenage girl, even younger than the woman. The bus driver would have said it was none of his business, and the police wouldn't have cared, as my mother had no proof that any crime was committed. She couldn't do a thing. She just rode the bus to her stop and ran to her house when she got there. My mother had never told anyone else this story, and I can remember the look in her eyes as she recounted it to me. They were red and glazed over, as if she was looking at something far beyond me. My mother never saw that woman again. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I've never been to Mexico myself, but my brother has, and he says it's absolutely amazing, so if these stories freak you out a bit, don't let them put you off from actually visiting. I'm sure it's a wonderful place, according to my brother it is anyway, and I'd really like to check it out myself one day as well. As always, make sure to check out the artwork of Anthony Salinas, and you'll hear from me again very, very soon. Stay spooky, and remember, the best things happen in the dark.